I'll never forget the first time I set foot in Ashbrook. It was supposed to be just a pit stop, somewhere off the highway where I could grab a bite and stretch my legs before continuing my drive across the country. But the moment I pulled into town, something about it felt wrong. The air was too thick, the buildings too quiet, and the trees felt like they were watching me. I parked in front of a small diner, the kind you only see in those forgotten towns, with the flickering neon sign outside. The place seemed deserted, but the moment I stepped inside, a bell above the door rang and a woman, no older than 40, looked up from behind the counter. Her face was pale, almost sickly, but it was the kind of sickness that didn't seem to have a reason. She just smiled, too wide, too forced. "Welcome to Penny's," she said, her voice unnaturally sweet. "What can I get you, hon?" I nodded and sat at the counter, noticing the strange emptiness in the room. The diner had a handful of booths, but none were occupied. I should have left then, something about it felt off, but I was hungry, and I convinced myself it was just one of those quirky small towns where things move at a slower pace. I ordered a burger and fries. As the woman moved to the kitchen, I scanned the walls, noticing the odd number of clocks hanging. There were 6, all showing different times, none of them synced. It was like they'd all been set to different time zones, or maybe they were frozen in time. My heart skipped when I realized none of them were ticking. "Here you go," the woman said, placing the plate in front of me. Her eyes didn't meet mine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark corners of the room. I felt the weight of it pressing down on my chest, like the air itself was thick with secrets. I tried to shake it off, taking a bite of the burger, but the taste was wrong. It wasn't bad, just off. A metallic tang lingered on my tongue, and I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. I put the burger down and looked around the diner again. This time, I noticed something else, the reflection in the window. It wasn't my own face staring back at me. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. The reflection in the window, if it wasn't me, then who was it? My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the face that was wrong, it was the eyes. They were darker, almost hollow, like someone had scraped out the soul from whoever was standing behind me. I spun around in my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nobody. Just the empty diner, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. My breath came in quick gasps as I forced myself to turn back to the reflection, but now the face was gone, replaced by my own wide-eyed terror staring back. I wiped my hand across my face, trying to calm myself. It was nothing. Just a trick of the light, or maybe fatigue. The long drive, the empty road, it had to be getting to me. But the air felt colder now. I looked around the diner again, my senses heightened, every little creak of the building making my skin crawl. The woman, Penny, if that was even her name, had gone silent. She was standing behind the counter, her back to me, staring at something just beyond the kitchen door. I couldn't tell what she was looking at, but the stillness in the room was suffocating. I stood up, wanting to leave, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the floor. The quiet was unbearable now, like the world had forgotten how to make sound. Then, without turning to face me, Penny spoke. "You shouldn't stay here too long, dear," her voice was a whisper, almost drowned out by the humming of the fridge. "It's not safe at night." I couldn't move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but something kept me frozen in place, my eyes locked on the back of her head. She hadn't even looked at me, but I could feel her watching me, as if she knew everything about me, everything I had ever done. "I have to go," I said, more to myself than to her. As I turned to leave, I felt the sudden weight of eyes on me. I glanced over my shoulder, and there, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, was a figure, tall, gaunt, and covered in shadows. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel it staring at me, its gaze heavy and hungry. My body reacted before my mind could process. I bolted for the door. I didn't even think about paying. I just needed to get out, needed to feel the sunlight again. But as I grabbed the handle, the door refused to open. It was stuck. "Let me out!" I shouted, pulling harder. But the door wouldn't budge. The thing behind me stepped closer, its shadow stretching toward me. I turned, my pulse racing. Penny was still there, but now she was smiling again. That same sickly, wide smile. "It's too late now, dear," she said, almost like a lullaby. "You're already part of Ashbrook." My mind was racing, panic gripping my chest like a vice. I yanked at the door again, my palms slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The woman, Penny, was still smiling, but her eyes had changed. They weren't wide anymore, they were narrow, like she was trying to hold back some darker, deeper thing. A thing that was just about to break free. I didn't know what to do. The figure in the doorway hadn't moved, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, its energy pressing in on me like it was filling the space between breaths. I had to get out. I had to survive. I glanced back at the counter. The food I'd been eating was gone. The plate had disappeared, leaving nothing but a cold, greasy stain on the counter. And on the floor near the edge of the kitchen, there was something else, a dark, wet stain spreading outward, like something had been dragged through it. It wasn't ketchup or any food I'd ever seen. It was, thicker, darker, almost black. Penny's smile didn't waver. But something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, an almost sad look, as if she knew exactly how this would play out. "You're not the first to try, you know," she said softly. "They all think they can leave, but they never do." I whipped around, my hand still locked on the door handle, but the room had changed. The air was heavier, colder. It felt like the walls themselves were pushing in, tightening the space around me. I could barely breathe. I turned to face the thing in the doorway again. It was no longer just a shadow, it was solid now, taking shape like it was being drawn in front of me. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its limbs seemed too long, too thin. It had no face, just a dark, empty void where a face should have been, but somehow, I knew it was staring at me. Waiting for me. The smell hit me then. A rancid, sour odor, like decaying meat mixed with damp earth. It clawed at my throat, and I gagged, stumbling backward, but the door still wouldn't budge. "You can scream all you want," Penny's voice was cold now, empty of the sweetness it had held before. "No one can hear you. No one ever does." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a cold stab, as if something inside me had been punctured. I reached up instinctively, but there was nothing there. Just a coldness that spread down my arms and through my veins. It was the thing's doing. I could feel it now, its hunger, its need to consume everything in its path. That's when I realized something horrible. It wasn't just trying to take me. It had taken everyone. Every face that had ever passed through Ashbrook, every stranger who had made the mistake of stopping here, was gone. And they hadn't left willingly. I felt a presence behind me. Something cold, something wrong. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the air shift, the pressure on my chest growing unbearable. My legs were shaking. My mind was swimming. The thing in the doorway reached out, its long fingers stretching toward me. I screamed. My scream echoed through the diner, but it felt hollow, like it was swallowed by the very walls around me. The thing in the doorway moved, slowly, deliberately, its fingers outstretched, inches away from touching me. I could feel the air grow colder, heavier. It was like a vacuum, sucking the life from the room, from my very soul. I jerked back, slamming myself against the door. The cold pain in my chest was growing, spreading like an infection. My body felt like it was betraying me, my limbs numb, my vision blurring. I was going to die here. I knew it. No one would ever know what happened to me, and Ashbrook would claim another soul. But then, something strange happened. The figure in the doorway stopped. It didn't move any closer. I couldn't understand it. Why wasn't it finishing what it had started? The hunger in its black, void-like eyes seemed to pause, as if it was waiting. Waiting for something. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural whisper from somewhere deep within the diner. "Leave. Leave now, or you'll join us." I spun around, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't see where the voice had come from. It wasn't Penny's. It wasn't the thing in the doorway. The voice was ancient, as if it had been trapped in this place for longer than I could comprehend. And then I saw them. The faces. The faces of the people who had been here before. They were faint at first, like shadows, blurred and almost impossible to make out. But the longer I looked, the clearer they became. They were there, pressed against the walls, distorted and twisted, their mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes were black, empty, like they had been drained of everything that made them human. "Help us," one of them mouthed, but no sound came from its lips. Its face was unrecognizable, its features twisted beyond recognition, as if it had been reshaped by the darkness that consumed this place. I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. There were more now, more faces, more figures standing in the shadows, each one staring at me with that hollow, desperate look. Some were children, others were older, but they all had the same thing in common: they were all trapped. They were all part of Ashbrook. The thing in the doorway stepped closer again, but this time it didn't move toward me. Instead, it reached out to one of the faces on the wall, its long fingers brushing against it. The face let out a low, mournful groan as the thing's touch passed over it, and I saw it: the thing was feeding. It was consuming them, slowly, piece by piece, as if they were nothing more than a memory. I realized with a sickening jolt that if I stayed, I would become one of them. A face pressed against the walls, trapped forever, unable to escape the insatiable hunger of this cursed town. "Get out!" I screamed, more to myself than to anyone else. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I yanked at the door again, but this time, it gave. The door swung open with a sickening creak, and I bolted outside, gasping for breath. The sun was setting, casting a dark shadow over the town, but I didn't stop. I ran, not looking back, not daring to slow down. The streets of Ashbrook were empty, eerily still, but I could feel something following me. I knew it was there. The hunger. The thing that had claimed so many before me, and would claim so many more if I didn't get out. But I was running blind, and the town, it wasn't letting me go. I ran through the streets of Ashbrook, my legs burning, my chest heaving, as if the very town itself was pushing me forward. The houses, all eerily identical, seemed to stretch on forever, their windows dark and lifeless, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. But I could hear it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind me. The thing was following. I pushed harder, the air colder now, the shadows growing longer, consuming everything around me. I passed by the small town's church, its steeple jutting up against the twilight sky, but I didn't stop. The place had felt off when I passed it earlier, and now it seemed like a place of refuge from nothing, a hollow shell that wouldn't help me. There was no safety in Ashbrook. There never had been. I turned onto another street, but something was wrong. The road was different. It didn't look familiar. The houses blurred together, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that the town was shifting, reshaping itself around me. I was running in circles. The streets didn't lead to anywhere. They just looped back on themselves. My breath caught in my throat as I skidded to a stop. In front of me, just as I had feared, was the diner. The same diner. Its flickering neon sign casting an eerie red glow across the parking lot. How was this possible? I had just left it. I had just fled, how could it be back in front of me? I stumbled back, looking around frantically. The streets, the town, it was like I was trapped in a nightmare. A cycle that I couldn't break free from. No matter where I ran, I would always end up here, at the beginning. Ashbrook had become a maze, an endless labyrinth that twisted reality itself. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. It wasn't just one presence anymore. I could hear others, dozens of others, all shuffling, crawling, whispering in that low, guttural language that I couldn't understand. It was as if the town had come alive, and the hungry shadows were closing in. I turned to face the diner, my back against the glass door, eyes scanning the parking lot. I was shaking. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I had to escape, but my legs were like lead, frozen in place. "Help," I whispered, not even sure if I was speaking to anyone in particular, but there, standing by the door of the diner, was Penny. Her wide, sickly smile was back, and behind her, I saw more faces, pale, distorted, their mouths stretched in silent screams. Their eyes were vacant. Hollow. "You shouldn't have come," Penny's voice was sharp now, venomous. "You should have known better. No one leaves Ashbrook. Not now. Not ever." I turned and ran again, but the sound of my footsteps was drowned out by the chorus of whispers, the scraping of unseen things moving across the streets. Every step I took seemed to sink into the ground, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow me. The air was thick with the scent of decay. I could feel the presence of something far worse than I had ever imagined, something older, more ancient than anything I could understand. I stumbled forward, my mind in a haze. There was no escaping this place. There was only one way out, and I didn't know if I could find it. The town had claimed me, and soon, I would become part of the walls. Part of the hunger. Just another face pressed against the glass, a forgotten soul in the shadow of Ashbrook. I ran blindly now, my mind a blur of panic and exhaustion. Every breath I took felt like it might be my last. The ground beneath me seemed to shift with every step, as if Ashbrook itself was warping around me, trapping me in a nightmare with no end. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. The hunger, whatever it was closing in. It wasn't just one thing anymore, it was a swarm of shadows, a tidal wave of malice that was sweeping through the town, drawn to me, to my fear. I turned a corner, my feet barely touching the ground, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. The street ahead of me stretched endlessly, but there, at the end of the road, was a dark silhouette, a figure standing perfectly still, facing me. It was the same as the others. Tall, gaunt, covered in shadows. But this one was different. This one had a face. Or rather, it had a mask of a face. The hollow, black eyes, the twisted mouth, all of it was a grotesque imitation of humanity. The mask, it wasn't part of the figure. It was separate, attached somehow, as if it had been glued to the thing's face. But it wasn't just any mask. It was a reflection of me. My face. My eyes, my mouth, distorted, twisted into something monstrous. I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was. This thing wasn't some stranger. It was me. It was everything I feared about myself, the darkness that had followed me across the country, the thing I had been running from my whole life. I had come to Ashbrook to escape, but in the end, the thing that hunted me the most was always inside me. The figure stepped forward, the sound of its footsteps eerily slow, but deliberate. It didn't speak, but I could feel its voice in my head, deep and hollow. It wasn't just a whisper now. It was a roar. "You belong here now. You always have." I staggered backward, my hands shaking. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees. My mind was racing, thoughts colliding with each other, but it was all so clear now. Ashbrook wasn't just a town. It wasn't just a place of horror. It was a prison for the lost, the broken, the ones who couldn't escape themselves. And I had never been meant to leave. None of us ever were. Behind me, I could hear the distant sound of the diner's door opening, the familiar jingle of the bell echoing in the growing silence. I didn't dare look. I didn't want to see Penny or any of the others standing there, their faces twisted into that same empty, hollow expression. I could already feel them, their presence all around me, their cold breath on my skin. But what terrified me most was the figure in front of me, the one that had taken my face. It reached out a hand toward me, its fingers long and impossibly thin. I felt the chill of its touch before it even made contact, a sensation like ice spreading through my veins. "Come with us," it whispered. "You are ours now. Forever." And then, just like that, everything went dark. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and suffocating, like it had a weight of its own. I couldn't feel my body anymore, but I could hear it, my heartbeat, still faint but steady. The whispers, they were growing louder, more numerous. It was as though I was surrounded by 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperate. Hungry. Begging for release. "You're one of us now," the voice echoed again. The one that had taken my face. It was everywhere. Inside my mind. Inside my bones. "There is no escape. You are ours." I shook my head, my thoughts muddled. I couldn't remember how long I had been here, how long I had been part of Ashbrook. Had I always been part of it? Was I just another soul trapped in the town, another forgotten face, lost to the hunger? And then, I saw it. In the distance, faint at first, was a light. A tiny flicker, like the glow of a far-off star. It was weak, but it was there. I focused all my energy on it, pulling myself toward it, willing my feet to move even though I couldn't feel them. The darkness around me seemed to push against me, but I forced myself to keep going. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It wasn't a star. It was a door. A door made of light. I reached for it. My hand trembled, but I felt warmth on my skin for the first time since I arrived. This was it. The escape. The way out. The light that promised freedom. But as my fingers brushed against the door, I felt something else. A pull. A weight that yanked at my soul, trying to drag me back. "You can't leave," a voice rasped, low and monstrous. The thing that had taken my face. The hunger. "You are mine now. You belong to Ashbrook. There is no going back." I felt its presence closing in behind me, its cold breath on my neck, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I refused to. I slammed my palm against the door, pushing with every ounce of strength I had left, and the world exploded. I woke up with a gasp, my lungs filling with air, the taste of dust and blood in my mouth. I was lying on the side of a road, the asphalt rough and gritty against my skin. My body ached, and my head throbbed. The world was real again. The air smelled fresh, crisp, and, thank God, there was no whispering. No hunger. Just silence. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and looked around. I was on a highway, far from Ashbrook. The sun was rising on the horizon, casting the world in a soft golden light. The town, it was gone. It was all gone. I stumbled forward, breathless, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was still reeling, but one thing was clear, I had made it out. I had escaped Ashbrook. Or had I? The moment I thought it, I heard a sound behind me. Soft. Faint. A rustling, like something dragging across the earth. I froze. I turned around slowly. There, at the edge of the highway, standing just beyond the tree line, I saw them. The faces. They were pale, twisted, their eyes hollow, staring at me. The same hollow eyes I had seen in that cursed diner. They were silent, but their presence filled the air with a sense of finality. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. Because I knew now, deep down, I had never truly escaped. Ashbrook had let me go. For now. But it would always be there, in the back of my mind, in the corner of my eye, waiting. The hunger would never stop. The whispers would always call to me. And one day, I would be back. There was no escaping Ashbrook. Not really.